Hag Sukkot Sameach. My name is Devorah Kalik from Bless Israel Network, and I'm speaking to you today. It's the first day of Sukkot, the feast of it's called the Feast of Booths, the Feast of Ingathering, the Feast of Tabernacles, and I wanted to share with you today a few thoughts about this wonderful feast and tie some things that you may not know that are in the scriptures. I want to let you know that today I'm going to be talking a lot from First Fruits of Zion's Torah Club Volume 3, which is the volume about the prophets, and the half Torah reading during the annual reading cycle. And the first thing I want to say is just tell you a little bit about my experience this year. Last night at sundown, of course, began what we call the most joyous feast of the year. And I was able to get my lulav and my etrog to be able to rejoice with the four species before the Lord. And I got them just in time, actually. And the son of my dearest friend here in Israel was able to come over and help me to get my sukkah up. And so I'm really grateful for all the help, since my husband, unfortunately, is not here this year. He's traveling in the States. I was also very privileged to be included in our friends' celebration with their family, and we had a really sumptuous meal. Really, it was a feast. And it was in their sukkah, which is down the mountain, down Mount Carmel, a little ways from where we live. It's always a very special feast in Israel, and everywhere you look, there are little booths or Sukkot as we commemorate when Israel dwelled in booths in the wilderness. And Israelis enjoy a really wonderful evening. Jews don't have any problem celebrating, and it's a lot of fun, and it begins at sundown. We have a great meal, and there's a lot of eating and drinking and merriment that goes well into the late hours of the evening, sometimes the wee hours of the morning. I actually heard my neighbors last night on the balcony above ours, well past midnight, so we do love this season. This is the seventh and last appointed feast or appointed time of the year, beginning 5 days after Yom Kippur on the 15th of Tishrei. And Leviticus 23 verse 34 tells us that this feast is to be celebrated for 7 days, and we are commanded to live temporarily in little huts or booths that we build, reminding us of the dwelling in booths during Israel's 40 years in the wilderness. They were dwelling in temporary tents. This is also the feast which celebrates the final harvest of the year. It's called Hag, that's why it's called Hag HaSif. And it also celebrates, so when all the fruits are gathered, the fruits and the rest of the crops from the summer are gathered in. And it very importantly, for those of us who follow Mashiach, it is the dress rehearsal for the future 1,000-year reign of our Messiah on the earth, the Mashiach ben David, Messiah son of David, who will rule from his kingdom in Jerusalem, and it will eventually cover all the earth. This is the only appointed time, it may interest you to know, that we are commanded to rejoice. You shall, and it says this in Deuteronomy chapter 16, verses 14 and 15. You shall rejoice in your feast, you and your son and your daughter, your male servant and your female servant, the Levite, the sojourner, the fatherless, and the widow who are within your towns. For 7 days you shall keep the feast to the Lord your God at the place that the Lord will choose, that meaning Jerusalem, because the Lord your God will bless you in all your produce and in all the work of your hands, so that you will be altogether joyful. Well, when when one realizes that this feast of the Lord will find its complete fulfillment one day, when our God is once again and at long last tabernacling among men in the person of Yeshua the Messiah, it's easy to understand why we are commanded to rejoice in this feast. That day, when he returns and this all takes place and is all fulfilled, will be a celebration, a great celebration. And it says in John chapter 1, verse 14, "And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, full of grace and truth. We have beheld his glory, glory as of the only Son from the Father." These words should carry us back to the Exodus, and in particular the tabernacles in the wilderness and the main tabernacle in the wilderness. Why? Because the word dwelt is here in the Greek means to encamp, to pitch a tent, or to tabernacle. This is what God did. He had the Israelites build him a huge tent, which is called the Mishkan, so that he could camp out with his people. The first coming of Yeshua the Messiah is the down payment on his return, when finally the Shekhinah, or God's dwelling presence, will be camping out with men once again on the earth. In Revelation 21, verses 2 through 3, to confirm this, says, "And I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, made ready as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, 'Behold, the tabernacle of God is among men, and he will dwell among them, and they shall be his people, and God himself will be among them.'" Well, I want to also tell you that besides this glorious and wonderful, these very positive and exciting verses that tell us a little bit of something about when God is dwelling on the earth with men again, there's also an important mention of Sukkot, or a connection to Sukkot rather, mentioned in Zechariah 14, which is the Haftorah, or the reading of the prophets, for the first day of Sukkot. This prophecy actually gives us a glimpse into the final war of this present world and the gathering of the nations against Jerusalem at the end of days, just before Messiah returns to the earth. The final battle, known as Armaggedon among Christians, is described in Revelation 16 and 19 and in the apostolic scriptures. And it's called the War of Gog and Magog, and is described in Ezekiel 38 and 39 in the Jewish scriptures. It appears from the Apostle John's vision in Revelation that there will actually be two wars of Gog and Magog. One that takes place just before the Messianic age, and before Yeshua or the Messiah returns, and one at the conclusion of the 1,000-year reign of Messiah, after Hasatan is unchained and released from the pit. He goes out and deceives the nations one last time and assembles them together from the four corners of the earth for his final assault on God's people. This is described in Revelation chapter 20. Gog and Magog, or Gog Magog, as it says in Hebrew, is a phrase which usually describes the coalition of nations which comes against the Jewish people. The coalition includes members or representatives from all nations of the world. Interestingly, the gematria of the phrase Gog Magog is 70. The number 70, and it's believed to hint at the 70 nations of the world. This interpretation agrees also with the teachings of the apostles. The book of Revelation in chapter 20, verse 8 says, "The nations which are in the four corners of the earth." Now, Zechariah 14 describes the first of these wars of Gog and Magog, And this is the same as Armaggedon, which is actually a misreading of the words Armaggedon in Hebrew in Revelation 16, verse 16. In the beginning of Zechariah 14, the prophet describes a great force which musters together in the Jezreel Valley, which is where Armaggedon, the mountain of Megiddo, is. According to Jeremiah 1:14, from there, this coalition from Megiddo marches south to Jerusalem. In the beginning, according to Jeremiah 1:15, their battle plans will succeed. Sadly, Jerusalem falls, and according to Zechariah 14:1, half of the city is captured and goes into exile. The invaders plunder and rape and take many of the Jewish people captive. But thanks to our God, their initial victory will be cut short when an angel pours out the wrath of God upon them. This is in Revelation 16, verses 17 through 21. Zechariah 14:3 proclaims that the Lord himself will go and fight against those nations. And that's, of course, because Zechariah tells us that he lands on the Mount of Olives and splits it in two. And in Isaiah 42, verse 13, it says of this same time, the Lord will go forth as a warrior. He will arouse his zeal like a man of war. He will step forward to save his people and his city. Isaiah 66, verse 16 says that he will execute judgment by fire and by his sword on all flesh, and those slain by the Lord will be many. He will directly intervene and defeat his enemies and Israel's enemies. Then Zechariah 14, verse 16 tells us, and it shall come to pass that everyone who is left of all the nations which came against Jerusalem shall go up from year to year to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, and to keep the feast of booths. This is our connection to Sukkot, and it is a prophetic picture that Sukkot represents this final time, the final 1,000 years of, I guess you could say, of humanity, that the Lord, through the person of Yeshua, will be reigning from Jerusalem. That's why we call it the millennial age. It's a 1,000-year reign. Now the prophet further tells us that those of the nations who will not go up to Jerusalem to worship the King will not receive the blessing of rain in their land. Well, my friends, though there is still much sorrow and pain to come upon the earth before this wonderful time of the Messianic age arrives, and of course that time will more than make up for the tribulation that is yet to come. This is why you and I must work while it is still day, for the night is soon coming upon us. Sukkot is all about the working together to build up the fallen tabernacle of David. If you haven't seen Rabbi Itzhak Shapiro's video called Sukkot 5777 Beyachad, please do watch it. It's excellent and explains what our work actually is in these last days. It's about building up the highway to our God and removing all the obstacles that cause people to stumble. This first means presenting the Jewish Messiah to the Jewish people in a Jewish context. I want as many as possible to receive the word of being able to enter into the kingdom of God on earth through attachment to Messiah Yeshua. And I am confident that you believe and want that as well. Otherwise, you wouldn't be watching this video. So, let's get to work, shall we? For there's much work to do before the bride of Messiah is ready for his return. May his return be soon and in our days. Hag Sukkot Sameach, and I'll be seeing you soon. להתראות.